It's the Premium Pete Show.
Internets, welcome back to another episode of the Premium Pete Show. Sitting here with, I'm excited to sit here with a mover and shaker, as I want to call, somebody who is behind the scenes, but also in front of the scenes. And more importantly, what I really love is a lot of people have came and done episodes here, like Michael Astoria, and then we talk about even like somebody like Eugene Rem, and even more. It's funny because my friend Mark from Cogent, Mark Zablau, was telling me, we got to have Matt Higgins.
Oh, I love that.
On the Premium Pete Show. And it's funny because I usually run down a list of what, people do. And obviously I'll just say entrepreneur, trailblazer, father. But more importantly, there's so many other things that you do. But internets, welcome Matt Higgins to the Premium Pete Show. Matt, welcome, man.
Thank you for having me.
Listen, right off the bat, it's your story is inspiring, more importantly, because you're a young kid from Queens. And at first time I seen you, I was like, you just look like money. And I was like, did he grow up with money? And it's okay if somebody did. But when I heard your story about how you grew up in Queens, and you had, what, 5 brothers?
I had 3 brothers.
3 brothers? Yeah. Any sisters?
No sisters.
So it's 4 of you.
Yes, yeah, 4 miserable children. Yep.
and that had to be a lot of fighting in that house with all the brothers.
Yeah, no.
Are you the oldest?
I'm the youngest.
Okay,
yeah,
really?
I was the youngest of 4, growing up in... they say Bayside, but it's really Springfield Gardens, Queens. And a garden apartment, a little shoebox, probably 800 square feet. 4 boys and my mother.
Now, your mom was in a wheelchair. I know you mentioned. Was she fighting a?
Yeah, my mother was a special lady. We were always poor, but she was always defiant. She didn't have an education growing up. She got her GED as an adult, so some of my earliest memories are going with her to community college for her to take classes to get her GED. But once she started, she never stopped. So throughout her life, she got a bachelor's degree in urban studies and a master's degree in library studies. She just kept getting more and more education. Didn't do much with it, but she kept getting more and more degrees. And those are my first memories of education as a road out of poverty.
Now, what about Pops? He wasn't around?
Yeah, he was around. They got divorced when I was 9 years old. He was a bill collector for like a slaughterhouse. Nice guy. Weren't especially close, but they got divorced when I was 9, and he lived in Corona, Queens, and we were growing up in Bayside.
So he didn't come by and excuse me, he didn't come by and
well, I remember he would come by every other Wednesday. Divorced kids remember he'd come by to bring the check. So that was pizza night and the check. And I'd watch the 2 of them fight at the table. So it wasn't exactly like a happy reunion, but I remember pretty regularly he would come every other week. And interesting, when you're a product of divorce, even if your parents don't get along, I remember how soothing it would still be on that Wednesday night because the 2 of them were together, even though I didn't have much of a relationship. It always stuck with me when I deal with my own kids, how
Sure.
important it is for them to see tranquility at
Sure.
the top.
It's funny. I had a friend of mine. He is an artist and editor. His name's Rob Markman. And he was telling me that how he had his mother and father, he don't ever remember them like kissing or hugging. And how, I guess he takes place of that in his marriage now, because when kids see that, you know what I mean, it means something to them.
Yeah, kids just want to see parents get along, right? So the number one, they're pretty selfish too, right? So they just need to know that they're stable, they're well fed, and that you guys get along. Other than that, they don't really care about your personal needs.
It's crazy too, even being a parent. It's funny because it's like being a parent. I speak about this all the time, but it's a tough job. And when I say it's a tough job, because you're also trying to figure your life out.
Yeah.
And it's like it's not like you're like this certified. Like we didn't go to classes, and we're just like we have a master's degree in parenting.
I found that to be one of the biggest disappointments of life, that I would think just with the passage of time, you suddenly are equipped with what it takes to be a good dad, and all the things that you were grappling with in your teens and your 20s would just magically disappear. Like you're completely a fully formed human, and that's what your kid expects. They expect that you actually are a fully formed person, and you're not. So it's interesting, right? There is no manuals, no certification, and yet out of all the things I do in a day, it's the thing I desperately want to get right. Like I always think about my epitaph, and I know exactly what I wanted to say. Herein lies a great dad who did the best he could.
Sure.
Right? Everything else is irrelevant and secondary. And society's not really set up to facilitate it, right? It's not like there's this work-life balance that is, placing the role of the father, up high. to ensure that you can jet out of work to go to parent-teacher night. So it's interesting. We all know that you need strong fathers in kids' lives, but I think there's still a struggle with work-life balance to figure out how to do it.
Sure. No, it's
That's my little dissertation.
No,
on
it's
a divorced dad because I care passionately about it.
It's and I feel like when you get divorced, you even wind up caring more.
Oh yeah, like I always think. I mean, one of the upsides, I suppose, of divorce, is if there are upsides, is that you put so much more into it. I mean, I have my kids multiple nights a week, and I make the most ridiculous travel arrangements to get back. I mean, I'll fly to Europe and back in same day just to make sure I stick to that schedule as best as I could. Not being a hero, I just know how important it is to maintain regular contact. And it's not the kind of thing that you could sequence. Well, I'll kill myself now to be successful, and then I'll return later on to being a good dad. You know that song "Cats in the Cradle"?
Yeah, the Silver Spoon. Yeah,
that's legit.
Oh, sure.
So you have to do it simultaneously, whether you like it or not. And then some things have to suffer. I always like to say, I mean, I have a handful of friends because I can't maintain friendships because something has to give, right? So instead, I maintain relationships with the kids. And that usually is what suffers, is those friendships. Yeah,
no, I always say, you know, your presence. That's why I have a motto. I live by presence over presence, and because that's the best gift you'll ever give. You know, sometimes we try to soothe our kids with gifts, but our presence is something that they'll remember forever.
Yeah, I read something though in a psychology journal. I love studies. I'm constantly looking for a study to either solve a problem or forgive me of something I did. And that there's one that about souvenirs, that when you're away, souvenir psychologically tells a kid that you were thinking about them while you were gone. So it's a little example.
I like that.
Yeah.
You know, you're an interesting fella, and what I mean by that is, you know, before we went on air to talk, you know, you've been traveling. And going back and forth, and we'll continue on your journey as a child, but for now it's like somebody who grew up in Queens, you know, 4 brothers, mom was, you know, disabled and passed away, rest in peace, and we'll go over that too. But I'm like, it's crazy sometimes when you hear these stories of somebody who, you know, slept on the floor, a mattress on the floor, you know, and then on a plane with Steve Ross. I mean, does this ever like you seem like so natural, like meaning like, you know, authentic guy that's like, yo, I'm here and this is what I do and I do it good. But do you ever like say to yourself like, fuck, man, this is amazing?
Yeah, I'd be lying if I said I do, because very early on, I feel like I made a decision that I was not going to let the circumstances of my birth define the rest of my life. And so it fed a degree of defiance that I think I still carry with me. Not a chip, but very defiant about whatever circumstances I'm dealing with. And that was my early response to poverty. Like, wait a second, this is not a good hand. There's a way out of here. And some of the earliest decisions I made were to make really unconventional decisions that would drown out everybody else's opinion to go my own route. And once I did that once and it was successful, it became my pattern. I know I'm talking in the abstract, but you know, I'm speaking about dropping out of high school, right?
Sure.
It's kind of a crazy decision.
Now I remember reading something that you got left back on purpose 3 times.
Yeah.
What is that even about?
So to paint a picture, growing up in Queens, my mother was a great woman, really trying to take care of the kids, doing the best she can. But her illnesses, and people always say, "What'd she have?" And I said, "It's like the trials of Job." You know, she had a little bit of everything. Like, was kind of thrown at her. But her knees were given out. She had a thyroid condition. She was very heavy. It's very hard for her to move around. And here we were trying to stay above water, and the water was rising every day. And she is the one who gave me the idea. I watched her go as an adult, get her GED, and then go to college with it. And when I was probably seventh grade, I thought, well, why don't I just do that on purpose? Like, if I can go ahead and drop out of high school, I can get a job as a college student a lot faster. Everything was about, how do I get out of poverty as fast as possible? Sure. And so that was the epiphany. Got to 9th grade, and I said, well, this is the play that I'm going to run. And I would just sit in the back of the homeroom with all the kids with the beepers back in the day,
sure.
You know, doing whatever they would do it, right? And I was just kept my head on the desk and just would nap for a couple of years until it was time. But then it was time.
You were hibernating.
Oh well, yeah, getting picked up by the truant police at McDonald's.
Sure,
It was kind of. Then I'd go home, watch the Gulf War in the afternoon for a bit, and come back. It was just. I pulled up my transcript a couple of years ago, so I had to give a speech, and legitimately like a 48 was my average. So I would just deliberately wait right? Because that was the play I was running. Plus, I was working at a deli overnight. I'd carry my butterfly knife to this place in Woodhaven, Queens, because all the degenerates would come in the middle of the night ordering their corncob pipes and doing whatever,
Sure.
Crazy period of time.
Crack time, probably.
Yeah, exactly. So that to me it was, this is not a sustainable life anyway. So I'm going to make a choice. I come up with this path, which is I'm going to drop out and I'm going to start high school. I'm going to start college early. It's one thing to come up with a plan and then actually have to execute.
And go get your GED.
And go get my GED. And I remember when the rubber meets the road. Now I'm 16. Been left back 3 years in a row, I guess. And now it's time. And you have to return all your textbooks. And I remember walking, and that's like now you're with all your peers, and they're all moving on with their life, and they're starting to get serious, and you're returning your textbooks as a high school dropout.
Sure.
And I remember walking into my science teacher, Mr. Rosenthal, if you're still around, you left an impression. I remember giving him my textbook, and he looks to me for the whole class. He's like, Higgins, such a waste, so talented. And he's like, I was like, whatever, made some stupid snarky comment.
Sure.
He's like, I'll see you at McDonald's. Right. And I remember turning around. I said, you know what? If you see me at McDonald's, it's because I own it. And I was like, Matt out. Then I sat down on the steps of Doza, smoked a cigarette, and I was like, I may have just thrown my life away. Like all the bravado was gone. It was like It was almost like you could hear the blood rushing through your ears. Like, oh my God, I can't believe I've done this.
Well, and what was your next step from there?
Well, like everything I do, when I'm at these moments of transcendence, take a step back, gather, say, no, you are operating according to instinct, pure, raw instinct. Your mother is getting progressively worse. This is eventually not going to end well, and you need to make as much money as humanly possible, as fast as possible, and this is a smart way to do it. And I remember going to GED classes at Queensborough Community College, sitting in the room and thinking, like, this is not for me. Like, I think I could pass this test. I'm not going to take 6 months worth of classes. Next week, I went to Springfield Gardens High School in Queens. Took my GED on standby. Following week, I took my SATs. And then within 3 months, I was enrolled in college. And so then I was like, okay, that worked. No one stopped me. Now I'm 16. Now I'm in college. I was like, well, let's press this. By the end of the year, I was president of the debate team. So then I go to my prom. I'm like, let me do a little victory lap. Let me go see my science teacher. And so everyone's around. It's like, oh, how's high school going? I just finished my first year. I have a 3.6, and I'm president of the debate team. Nice to meet you. So I tell that story always because I had to make so many unconventional decisions that didn't seem to make sense from an outsider looking in. But you don't realize, because I never invited anybody over to my house, that my mother is dying in the next room. And it doesn't matter. There's no government agency that's going to run in. There's government cheese in the refrigerator. I'm embarrassed. I'm not telling my friends. We're taking the Q27 bus to a pantry every weekend to get food. Nobody knows because we tend to hide our deepest problems and our struggles. So that decision was the absolute smartest decision I could have made, but it looked crazy from the outside looking in. Once I started going down that path, it's very hard to stop. Once you sort of flex that muscle of unconventional decision making, right, and it works out, then it becomes almost like a drug. Like, oh, wait a second, I don't need to listen to anybody. I have the answers inside myself.
I tell you, your story is just incredible because it's like, now you're in college, right?
Yeah.
You got a GED, and then maybe I'm skipping a little, but how does it even come a possibility where you become the press secretary for Rudy Giuliani? Like, how does that? For me, I'm sure you told the story a bunch of times, but for me, it's like I'm like, how does that even like add up?
Yeah, I don't know how to tell the story. Like, I know what the underlying drive was, which was mostly desperation, right? I just kept connecting the dots to go as fast as humanly possible to get out of poverty, because all I wanted to do was take care of my mother, but selfishly, I wanted to be emancipated. No kid wants to take care of their parent. I don't care how nice you are.
Sure.
And I like to think that I was a sweet kid. I was as resentful as anybody else that I was taking care of her. So I wanted to make as much money as possible so she'd be okay, but so that I could be emancipated, right? And that fueled me. And I started just watching the patterns, right? Like, I think very early on, I was given a gift of pattern recognition and started applying it to my own life. So I figured out I was pretty good as a communicator. So let me do that. And I became a reporter at a very young age while I was still in college, and became a little bit of a muckraker. I'd do investigative reporting, and people would send me their problems for a local newspaper, and I would win some journalism awards and whatnot. And I just started pressing whatever it was that I was talented at, and I was continued to be willing to be uncomfortable constantly. So I would be the one who, after 1 year wasn't promoted, I would quit the job. And I kept kind of jumping and doing whatever necessary to climb as fast as possible. I knew that the GED would always be a little bit of a scar now on my record that would be hard to explain. So rather than explain it, I said, I'll just go get a law degree at a fancy law school. And I was on law review. So that would end up in a footnote kind of way, say, oh, you also were smart, right? Like you weren't a total, You weren't a total fuck up.
Because the GD, it's crazy, but it has like a stain to it.
Oh, it does have a stain. And so, but I always tell people this is when I talk to kids too. Like I've talked to kids in the Bronx doing a GD program. I said, what's interesting about life is you won't be judged by where you started, but by where you ended up and how much ground you covered in between. So where you started when you screwed up actually becomes an asset, so long as the juxtaposition from where you are now is great enough, right? So a GD has that little bit of the stigma, but if you go to law school, especially if you're on law review and it's a top school, it actually is more just an interesting data points. But I knew I needed to do something about that. And then I would make more money if I obviously had a law degree. So all during those years from 16 to 26, which was a critical period, I just kept hustling, being willing to go from job to job. If I didn't get promoted, I left Giuliani 3 times. No,
really?
Two times. Yeah, because first year I'm 20, let's just say I'm 2 years old. It took me 7 years to graduate college because I went 2 jobs during the day. I went to school at night. It took 7 years. And then first year at the mayor's office, I was ghostwriting speeches and writing all these crazy things, and I'm making $27,000 a year. And then I said, I want to be deputy press secretary in charge of all like law enforcement because I want that. I want to, and they're like, okay, simmer down, young man.
Calm down, buddy.
Calm down, be patient. Which lasted for like a week, and I was like,
young grasshopper.
Yeah, young grasshopper, Danielson.
Yeah.
So wax on, wax on.
Yeah.
And I was like, no, I don't. I left. I actually went to an insurance company, and they were paying for law school, and it was doubled my salary, except again, I could hear the blood rushing through my ears. It was like a 9-to-5 job. Like this is soul crushing. I got to get back, and they offered me a job back at the mayor's office again, doubling my salary. So. And then I did it, again, a year and a half later. And no one really knew the true situation at home. I always kind of kept it a secret. I carried a lot of shame when I was a kid. And I thought nobody cared, nobody would help. And I was embarrassed. So no one really saw kind of what I felt like was a gun to my head. But as a result, it motivated me to keep making moves, keep jumping until I could end up at a good spot.
So how did the day come where, how were you... known that you got this position?
So
because I also know it was a happy day and at the same time a very sad day.
Yeah, I'm in my last year of law school at night, my 4th year at Fordham, trying to hold it all together. And my mother's just getting progressively worse. I was making decent money, but we still didn't have anything. She couldn't even get out of bed anymore. And she was just struggling. I used to always want to keep an ear out for her, but at the same time, I would try to sleep. I used to wrap a towel around my head so I could hear through the fabric through the night. Like this is how crazy it was, but completely exhausted. And I was working at an internet company, and the mayor called, and it was April of 2001, and offered me a job as press secretary, which I was overwhelmed by. I'm like, I'm taking care of my mother. I'm at law school. I can barely keep up. Press secretary of the mayor of New York. But I would have been the youngest one in history, 26 years old, and the money was phenomenal. At the time, I think it was over $100,000 a year. So to go from GED to $100,000, it was finally enough money that I could take care of my mother.
Sure.
Material change in our life that I felt I needed to do it. So, and it was the last year of the administration. And if anybody worked in government knows, you're like a lame duck. Nobody cares about you. It's like basically you're on your way out, and everybody says good riddance. And that's what April 2001 was. So I figured, all right, I can do law school, and I could take this job, make a lot of money. And the night before I start, my mother was in really bad shape and just was saying, please don't go to work. Like, don't go to work today. And I remember fighting with her, like, we have no money if I don't go to work. Like, there's literally no money in this house. I have to go. So I go to work that day, and around 10 in the morning, I call her, and she said, well, apparently when you call an ambulance, you have to go to the hospital. I said, you called an ambulance. That's good. I was always hoping somebody would intervene, right? And a little bit of backstory, we would spend probably one night a month in the emergency room, because when you're growing up poor and you have no insurance, you tend to use the ER as your family clinic.
Sure.
So I would sit outside the ER and read my law school textbooks, and nobody would ever do anything. You'd wait for 4 hours, and then we'd go home at 4 a.m, go back to work. So I assumed this was just another one of those times. And I said, I'll come meet you. Where are you going? She asked the EMTs, and they were taking her to Long Island Jewish, and I assumed this would just be another day. And by the time I got there, she had just died. So for me, I'd just become press secretary of the mayor of New York, and this lifelong struggle that I had been trying to win, I had just lost. So it was at the exact precipice of success. I feel like it all kind of came crashing down, which was completely surreal. Like everything, I just lost it in the hospital, and to me that's always defined how I see the world too. Number one, it doesn't always end well, right? Like my instincts to try to do everything I could to help were right, because despite the system and the infrastructure around you, the government, like no one's really going to step in and change your circumstances. Like you have to do it yourself.
Sure.
And two, if anybody had at that moment in time, like intervened, especially when I was a kid, it would have made all the difference in the world, right? Like anybody coming and saying, how do we help? Like, what can we do for you? So I'll never forget the impact that wasn't made by intervention. Does that make sense? Like I understand that if I'm in a position of power and I have the money and I could do it, that is the best use of my time and resources. Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. It's always so hard to convey. I always imagine my 16-year-old self or, her, like a little bit of intervention would have just transformed everything, right? So I'm going to be in a position one day to make that. I am in a position now. Like that's incredible. Sometimes I get excited about it. Like if I can just make a little bit of a difference. So now I went back and I fund scholarships at Queens College where she went for single mothers.
Nice.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not being a hero. It's not the biggest deal in the world. No, but I get so excited when I get the letters because I know what that does, right? I know that mother who's trying to raise her kid now has a few extra $1,000. It's like, it's life-changing. So I try to stay in the 16-year-old Matt realm and never go too far from it because I think that's where I'm ultimately going to have my greatest impact.
I mean,
I feel like I babbled and told you the story too.
It's special when people do stuff like that. It's meaningful, and I'm sure Mom is looking down, very proud of you.
Yeah.
You have 3 other brothers. Are they also successful or no?
I do. We're all successful in our own right. We all carry a little bit of the dysfunction that you have with you forever when you grow up like that. But my brother's a lawyer. The other one is a stockbroker. The other one is a genius who just sort of plays guitar and thinks about math problems. But they're all together. I was the only one who stayed behind. So. They were a little bit older, so sometimes the youngest one ends up kind of bringing up the rear, which pisses you off for a period of time, and then you get over it. But I was the one who was there when everything went down. Interestingly, but because she died when I was Giuliani's press secretary, he gave her like a head of state funeral, which was incredible.
Really?
Yeah. Like I remember my oldest brother Timmy, who was hilarious. He goes to the funeral. He's like, Matthew, was Mom a made woman? Like, was she in a fucking mob? Because who are all these people? And it was insane. And then Giuliani did something really nice. So we were having this conversation. What was important to your mother? I was like, college was the most important thing. It redeemed her, right? She had struggled so much, and she went to college. It gave her self-respect. And the school was always so great to me. Like we would get our loans, and our loans would fund our life. He had her casket taken throughout the college, like in like a motorcade. So crazy.
Listen, so how was it working with Giuliani?
Oh, it was great. I mean, he was always so good to me, notwithstanding current political state, which I have my own opinions on, but leaving that aside for a second. Back in the day, he took an ungovernable city and made it governable.
He hated the Italians, man.
Yeah,
it's funny for being
really?
Italian.
He was one of you. What are you talking about?
He
loved Fiolo LaGuardia, didn't he?
He tried to take down the mob,
Oh, is that the?
I heard a story, and I don't know if this is true.
Yeah.
But I heard a story that, again, I don't know if it's true, but I heard that Giuliani's father or something owned like a store or something, and I heard that he was shooken down by one of the mob, like a mob, and then so he had a vendetta against him or something like that. Something happened in his family. Obviously you want to get rid of crime. I'm not saying the mob is good. I'm just saying.
Yeah, I don't know how to respond to this. So what do you do? I'd feel bad for the mob?
No.
I mean, like, Karen, I saw your post on Goodfellas.
Why'd you do
Best
that?
movie, by the way.
It's incredible. No, but what I mean is he really he went after the mob very hard at that time.
He did. He went after. He cleaned up the fish market, and But I think that was one part. I think he created an aspiration for the city to define itself. Like you don't have to have 2,000 murders a year. Like we can remember, he brought it down to 600.
Sure.
Like you don't have to walk down Times Square and be assaulted, right? So again, he had his rough edges for sure, and I'm not going to apologize for all those. But as a leader back in the day, and he was certainly the right person on 9/11, right? When I was with him. And I think he did a phenomenal job. I'll never change my opinion on that. Now, Rudy Giuliani circa 2018 is a different thing, but I didn't sign a lifetime oath of fidelity to agree with everything he said. I did my service, and I thought he did a great job.
You were making you said 6 figures, 100,000 plus. Being somebody who grew up poor and knew what it was to struggle. What did you ever buy anything like from your first paycheck, or like when you got to a chance where your bank account started to flourish? Did you do something stupid or fun or?
I still am, but back, as my wife will point out, but back in the day, a car was a big deal. Yeah. We didn't have a car. My mother never took a vacation and never actually got on a plane. Right? I mean, we were legit poor, right? So, a car was a big moment. Credit. The ability to buy a car and actually not pay for it, like the American way. So that was probably my first memories were cars. I mean, the first car was a Nissan Maxima. I bought it for $500 from a 70-year-old lady. And then I went to the chop shop up in Willets Point to get a radiator to go ahead and. Nice. So that was my first car. But I think cars were how I remember starting to make it. And then my first apartment in Manhattan.
Would you say that you learned more from your failures or your successes?
I think I learned more from my context than anything else. So
what do you mean by that?
I mean that whenever I'm tested or I come up against a difficult circumstance, that it never compares to the idea of the suffering that my parent went through and ultimately succumbed to, right? So nothing holds up against that level of human suffering, and that brings me a level of peace with all my trials and tribulations, right? So I always contextualized everything. Well, at least no one's dying today. It's just everything seems slightly less relevant. So less about failure and more about context.
As an entrepreneur and somebody who, and I'll go over it and you could, correct me if I'm wrong or add, but I mean, vice president of the Dolphins, right?
Mm-hmm. Vice chair.
Vice chairman?
You got to give me due.
Okay, excuse me. Sorry about that.
Don't cheapen.
Okay. I didn't know they upped you.
No, they did.
They bumped you up.
Exactly. I mean, vice president when you work there.
They open up the books for you.
Exactly. They open the books. Tommy, he's gone. There's nothing we can do about it. There's nothing we can do about it. Right? The phone booth scene, right? Epic. For those who don't know what we're talking about.
I go, Goodfellas. Internets who listen to this know that how much I love Goodfellas.
I quote it regularly. Yeah. I get frustrated when millennials maybe don't always know what you're talking about. I think it should be required viewing.
It was so ahead of its time. But you look at it, like, it's crazy when you think about it's insane. Then you were, what was your position at the Jets, New York Jets?
So the sequence was I go from Giuliani to the first employee of the rebuilding the Trade Center site.
Okay.
Remember, this is post 9/11.
Yep.
There's no template for how do you rebuild an entire part of an
never
American
happened.
city that's been destroyed. And so there's a huge allocation of federal money and not sure what to do with it. So I was actually the first. Other people vie for this title, so maybe I'll say it's a tie with my friend Stephen Pryor. But day one, ground zero, what do you do? And I was there for 2 years helping put together the process to eventually choose the memorial and the site. And I used to write speeches for the governor and help put all that together. I did that so I was at ground zero from the moment the planes hit for over 2 years. And then I transitioned to the Jets, which I needed a little bit of frivolity in my life. I mean, you're around all that mayhem and all that adrenaline and all that sadness. Like, I just needed a break. And my mother had died kind of in the middle of all that. So I transitioned to sports to be.
But it's funny because I feel like how do you get a position at the Jets? Like I mean,
well, they were in the middle. I don't know if you remember, but it was called the Stadium Wars at the time. The Jets never had their own home, and so we were trying to build a stadium on the west side, and we ended up in an epic death match
I remember
with Cablevision,
that.
right?
Yeah.
So I was on one side of it, and Cablevision was on the other side of it, and so it was just they needed somebody who could run that effort, who understood land use, PR, all the different things that go into building a project in the middle of a city.
Sure.
So that's how I started, and then I probably overstayed my welcome. Ended up getting promoted a few times till I was eventually running the business.
I know there's some point where they call you, like, you an advisor, right? Now, for somebody who may not, for listener who may not know, like, what does an advisor do? Like,
It's such a terrible title, right?
I know,
It's
right? Because
it's great work if you can get it. I don't know if it, I think it's just a proxy for saying you were a close confidant, right?
Okay.
I mean, I think my principal job at the Jets was ultimately to oversee the business of the team. So there's the sporting side, right? There's the general manager who's pulling together the roster. There's the head coach. I worked with Rex Ryan at the time, who was awesome, by the way. Let's go get a goddamn snack. Do you remember that?
Sure.
From HBO.
Classic.
Of course. So, and then there was Eric Mangini I was working with. So there's coach, GM, and then this business. So I oversaw the business, helping build a new stadium, selling out the stadium, tickets, sponsorship, suites. That was my job. And I did that cumulatively at the Jets for 8 years. So it was a huge part of my life, and helped build a new practice facility out in New Jersey, moved my family out. I was pissed off tue that we didn't succeed in New York. So
Hey, Jersey's quiet. It's 5 minutes slower.
Jersey's
beautiful
good. Jersey gets a bad rap. It's not fair. It's I've become a fan of Jersey. You spend your whole life in Long Island making fun of New Jersey, having never visited it, and then you visit New Jersey. You're like, oh, we should be making fun of Long Island. Like, we had it wrong.
Yeah.
For all the internets out there from Long Island are hearing
For sure. He goes in Long Island. Benson,
Yeah,
like
see?
a video.
But the thing is, that people in Long Island don't realize that we don't have traffic in Jersey anywhere near what you have in Long Island. Having somebody who drove through Queens for all those years, and you're always in traffic no matter what time of day, we don't have that in New Jersey. So score one for us.
You mentioned, I heard you mention Curtis Martin, former NFL running back.
Yes, I'm very close to Curtis
Yeah,
Martin.
you spoke about how much you speak to him, how special he is.
Yep.
Could you tell the internet what Curtis means to you?
Yeah, I think people always ask, do you have a mentor? And I think I have. I look at my life as a series of people who passed the baton, and I was the baton that was passed from one person to another. And we all have that. If you look back at your life, you'll realize somebody was carrying you and then handed you off to somebody else. And but my closest thing to my mentor is more of a spiritual mentor. I call Curtis my personal Jesus. Just an incredibly insightful human being who has the answers to every test. So if ever I have a moral or ethical dilemma, or I need to figure out how to be my better self, I can turn to Curtis. And it's just a relationship I've had since he was back at the team. And just a very, very
What is he doing
person.
now?
He's doing a ton of projects. He actually advises people a lot behind the scenes in ways you would never know. Like, other people have figured out that Curtis has the answers to the test. He's got some businesses that he's working on. Just so special and gentle and insightful. I'd love to do a podcast with him one day, or I just want to expose him to the world.
Sure.
And I think people don't realize. And sometimes athletes get put in a box, especially former athletes, right? You presume, they're not going to be great business people necessarily, or whatever, right? They don't. There's so many diamonds lurking out there that are typecast, and Curtis has the gift.
More than an athlete. More than an athlete. Internet's listening. You know what? Let's take a quick break. There's so many goddamn titles to this guy. It's funny. I haven't even gotten to the Gary V yet.
Yep.
I got to get into the Miami Dolphins, Steve Ross. Plus even a survivor of cancer.
Yeah.
Fuck, man. It's like,
I'm just trying to get it all in.
Are you going to have a documentary about you?
No, and then I go out in like a big supernova. It's going to be dramatic, whatever it is.
Internet's the one and only Matt Higgins. Don't go nowhere. We'll be right back. Chill.
Hey everyone, it's Michael Lastoria, co-founder of And Pizza, chatting premium pizza with Premium Pete, and you are locked in on the Premium Pete Show. Stay tuned.
Internets, and we're back sitting here with Matt Higgins. Listen, it's crazy that we already went so far into some of your journey and didn't even talk about Gary Vaynerchuk. And what I love is, this is where I love having people like you on, because people see Gary, people see all these other people, and very talented and very smart. But it's like, you're the guy like behind the scenes who was kind of like believing in people like that way before maybe they even came to the masses. Even like, and we'll get into soon, even like And Pizza, like Michael Astoria. But let's talk about Gary. You met Gary in a bagel store?
Yeah, I met Gary in a bagel store in 2009, and with my Jets job, everyone thought like, hey, we got to get Gary to buy a suite. This was the talk all the time. This guy is such a crazy Jets fan. We got to get him to buy a suite. So I trekked down to a bagel store in Springfield, New Jersey. Wine Library, which was his dad's business, is located over in New Jersey. And trying to sell a guy a suite is actually not the number one thing you want to do in the course of your day. So I wasn't exactly thrilled about it. But I meet Gary for the first time, knowing very little about him, right? And I always like to break up that epic conversation into segments, right? First 10 minutes, it's like this guy's out of his mind, like the crazy frenetic energy and whatever. But the second 10 minutes, things got really interesting. He started making all these predictions about how the world was going to play out. Excuse me. He started making these predictions about how the world was going to play out. And I'll just rattle off a couple of them, right? And again, this is 2009. Social media is going to be huge, and it's going to democratize the creation of content. Everyone is going to have the ability to be a producer. As a result, corporations are going to need to navigate that space. And it doesn't matter whether it's Twitter or whatever the tool is, the power will be in their hands. And in order to do that, right, they're never going to be able to keep up. The biggest companies in the world are never going to be able to learn that competency in-house. They're going to need to hire people who get it, right? And so I'm going to go ahead and create a new company with my brother AJ. AJ was still in college, and we are going to be like the first, digital-only media company servicing those big corporations, and just a bunch of other predictions that made sense. And going back to pattern recognition, the ability to know it when you see it is really important, and the ability to act on it without anybody else seeing it as well, right? So it didn't matter if anybody thought which direction Gary was going to go in.
Sure.
I could see it, I could smell it, I could taste it, and I thought if I could play a role in his success, this could be an incredible partnership. So we did a deal where in exchange for 4 Jets tickets, I became the first client of VaynerMedia. And Gary's role was to take relatively anonymous Jets players and make them Twitter famous. And I got to watch him up close. And so began this idea that I started, thinking about over the next couple of years. And when I first joined with Steve Ross, I'm jumping around, but Gary was on my...
Who is the, super entrepreneur.
Right, hard to put him in a category, right? One of the greatest entrepreneurs of our time.
Sure.
And huge, massive developer, and massive this and that. Owns Equinox, owns SoulCycle,
owns the Dolphins.
Owns the Dolphins.
I mean, I didn't want to go off track of Gary, but let's get back.
Well,
to Gary.
I'll tell you the Gary part. Yeah. So when I first partnered up with Steve Ross, I had a bunch of ideas. I said, this idea I've been sitting with for the longest period of time. Gary has it. He sits in the stream of information because he's out there on social, he's out there communicating, he's opening himself up so he can see things. And he has the pattern recognition ability too. That's sort of immigrant hustle, where he knows how things are going to play out. He's got all this great access to capital, access to deal flow and the insights. Why don't we marry it all together? Why don't we become a partner in the firm? It's still early back in those days. And let's create a new venture fund where we would back his ideas and access to those early stage, the Facebook type investments and whatnot. And what I love about Steve, he met Gary 30 minutes later. I get it. Not completely. No problem. Let's do it. That even though Steve is 78 years old now, and I'm this young kid back in the day, guess not so young anymore, he would get it right away. That's how we hit it off. So I went back to Gary and we worked on it for a year to figure out how to structure it. And I became his partner. One of the best decisions I've ever made in my life. I like to think he did okay. I think I did even better backing Gary. And so now he's my brother.
Yeah, it's amazing. He what I love is more importantly than what he does. I love his heart. That dude is all heart, man. Yeah. I remember, and the reason why I say that for is even just how much he puts in. I was up in Vayner offices. That dude was there. It was like 10:30, 11:30 at night.
Right.
I remember when he pulled the mic piece off of his shirt. He was like, "I'm going home." He looked like he was done.
Yeah.
And he started from early in the morning, and there was people coming up to take pictures with him. People coming up to do small little interviews, like having meetings, playing Twitch. I was like, this fucking guy is. He is somebody I feel that hopefully could shape just a lot of heart in the game.
Well, that's what I love. People ask what's it like to be with Gary and what's Gary really like. I get that question a lot too.
Sure.
There's the haters, there's the lovers, there's everybody in between. I said Gary is exactly what you perceive him to be. In fact, he doesn't do himself justice. Gary is also a Steve Jobs-like type person who can see the future and know what you want to buy before you do. He doesn't amplify that on social because he's just connecting with people with heart, right? And really motivated to lift people up. But he's leaving a lot of Gary on the table. We just had this guy, I was at his house in the Hamptons a couple of days ago, and I was giving him that lecture saying, the world should be exposed to your brilliance too about product and marketing and whatnot. And at the moment, I feel like they're only getting a small piece of it. But back to the decision and the bagel store. I always, when I talk to interns, talk to anybody and tell them that story, I said the takeaway from that story was that you didn't have to be a rocket scientist to know that Gary Vaynerchuk is going to be a transformational figure who's probably going to be very successful with that firm. You just had need to have the confidence to look past the fact that he hadn't done it before, that he had a frenetic speaking style, right? And that he was his energy's all over, and he had a bombastic confidence, right? Those things, if you allowed those to distract you, you would never make the move. But to me, that had nothing to do with the core fact that he was right? And so I feel like I always try to stay close to that ability for me to recognize in people, maybe even what they don't recognize in themselves yet, right? Because everybody's always feeling around. I think I might be great, but I got some haters around me, or no one's backed me yet, But I think
they start doubting themselves.
Right? They have doubt. I have doubt. We all have doubt, right? It's the enemy of great. And so, if you could be that person in somebody's life who can spot it for them and kind of and confirm it, there's a lot of opportunity. And Gary is one example, but I've done it a bunch of times and been able to draft behind other people's greatness. That's the other point. That lecture I always give to folks is, once you settle into submitting to the greatness of others and seeking it out, then you can make real money in life. It's when you think you need to be great that you're limited, right? Because it can't scale. You can only be so great. But you can back a lot of great people.
For sure. You that's the business you're in too, besides many other things, but is backing people who are about to take off on that spaceship.
Yeah.
But I will say this, have you had a lot of things that you were wrong about that, shaped you too?
Yeah, I've had things where I've been most wrong is when I get so enamored with an idea that I think that the idea itself is powerful enough to overcome all the deficiencies that are going to sink it. So it's a very long way of saying people are the most important factor, right? So when I've backed an idea, this idea is so great, it doesn't really matter the fact that the CEO and founder can't run a lemonade stand, you know what I mean? And it's not deserving of having a bank account. It doesn't matter. The idea is so great. I've been terribly wrong. So, but I think I'm great at pivoting and iterating, right? When you're a survivor and you grow up with nothing, you've got to make sure you learn your lessons and you don't make the same mistake twice. I don't usually make the same mistake twice. So I've had some misses, and it's usually about people.
I heard you mention that, for entrepreneurs that you back, that you look, that if you're going to back someone, obviously you look for them to have confidence and humility. Right. Explain that further.
Yeah, I think confidence, I think to be humble actually requires confidence, right? If you're insecure, you don't want to let anybody see it, and you don't want to be humble or vulnerable. So I think it's very important in business because there's going to come a point where you're going to need to pivot. No one's PowerPoint ends up being the actual business you create. So along the way, you're going to need to pivot the idea. You're going to need to evolve as a leader because you're going to find out that you're not perfect as a CEO just because you came up with the idea. All these different things, your success in your life is going to depend on your ability to pivot. And if you don't have the confidence because you're worried that somebody's going to call you out for being wrong, then you'll never get there, right? So once you have that confidence, then you could be humble and you could take feedback, you could take input. So it's interesting that sometimes people feel like those two things are mutually exclusive, but they're actually codependent. Confidence and humility.
What's crazy too is before the break we mentioned that you're a cancer survivor.
Yep.
How did you battle through that? Like, how did you get through all that? Like, and keep your head up and not put the covers over you.
Yeah. I remember I was real pissed off because I was at the Jets and I had hit a certain point in my career that I was doing really well, and then I end up getting testicular cancer. My son was only 3 months old at the time. And I was just like, fuck now? Like, I'm just hitting my stride. And I was mad. I was really defiant. And I remember I got diagnosed on let's say a Tuesday, went in, you go in really quick. They want to remove that tumor as fast as possible, which is pretty startling. Like, it's an important part of the male anatomy. Like, you want to sit with it for a minute before you part with it. Like, do we really have to go in tomorrow? So literally go in the next day, have the surgery, go back home late that night, and then one day later I go back to work because I was so caught up with my career being derailed, right? Like I was like, I am not going to go back to poverty, which is a little nuts in retrospect. So one of my biggest regrets actually is that I didn't take advantage of the time as much as I could have. But that's, a whole nother story. What I learned from cancer, though, there was a period of time for maybe a couple of weeks when I thought that I was much further along and that I could die, that most of my thoughts didn't hold up against the prospect of dying. So what does that mean? I spent a lot of time dreaming of big houses and looking through the New York Times real estate section, right? Well, that's irrelevant if I'm dying in a few months. Almost all my thoughts were irrelevant, and I called it zero time, right? And drill down to what do I really care about on my deathbed? And it was, what kind of dad was I? Like that was the only thought that actually held up to the notion that you might die really quickly. And to me, that was an epiphany. I felt like, having gone through cancer, I knew what my last thought will be on my deathbed. I will audit and survey, did I do right by my kids? And I've held on to that ever since. And also that life should have a degree of hedonism, because all this other stuff is completely irrelevant, should be gone. I feel like once I knew I wasn't going to die, and I went through Sloan Kettering, went through the process, I found it was tremendously impactful on my personality and how I see the world. Like it ended up being, to be honest, net positive. It's not something I really feel, I'd be lying if I dramatized it. I felt like it gave me a lot of time to reflect, and it gave me a chance to realize what's important and what's not important.
That's powerful. I mean, I don't suggest everyone to get cancer, but that's powerful to...
Also prompted me to like get off your ass. You're like, you're eating gyros. You're like 80 pounds overweight. Get your shit together and start running marathons.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you spoke about that, but I know that at one point in time you were heavier, right?
I'm heavier again. I'm the like prototypical yo-yo dieter, but I'm trying.
You look. Don't
praise me.
I don't compliment men all the time, but I mean,
don't praise me.
You look slim. You look good. You
got to hold me accountable. Don't declare victory. Talk to me in a year if I'm here.
Is that something that you grew up heavy?
Yeah, I think we all deal with our emotional issues. I deal with mine with eating, right? And I'm part of one of the millions of internets out there who use food as a coping mechanism. I think it actually, not to psychobabble, but back when I was a kid and we had nothing, food was the only time we were actually happy. When I'd sit with my mother and she'd order some indulgent meal from Gino's Pizzeria. It felt like we were okay, right? As opposed to eating government cheese or going to the pantry.
Sure.
It felt like we were winning. And so I think I did associate food with soothing. That might be a big excuse. But regardless, I've always fought with weight issues. And I think my mother, a big part of how she died was actually obesity. I mean, she was pretty heavy when she passed away. So it's been a struggle. I think I'm winning now. I think I've cracked the code.
So you lost.
If you want it.
How many pounds did you lose?
So, are we going to count cumulatively gained and lost? I'd say in my most recent, quest, I'm down about 55 pounds.
Nice. Congratulations.
In the last year.
Listen, health is wealth. Let me tell you something.
Yep.
You could have all the money in the world. You have all the friends in the world that have money. And from what I've seen too, and I don't know if you've seen this, I know a good amount of people have a lot of money. But some of them are miserable.
Yeah.
You peace of mind, health, to outlive. It's like, I don't know. My grandmother's 97, man. She still has a sane brain. Still knows how to move. I call her a bastard. She calls me a son of a bitch. That's how we communicate with each other.
Yeah, I think for me, people focus way too much on longevity as opposed to quality, right? Like I presume it's kind of irrelevant how long we're going to live because you won't know about it as soon as it happens. At least that's based on the information I have so far. So why we care about that? But I do know that every day I'm here, I want to feel really good, right? And it seems to be weight is a huge part of it, and exercise is a huge part of it. Love, kids, happiness, and those are the pieces we have. But people get way too obsessed about, afraid of the dying of the light. I'm much more focused about how do I crush it while I'm here, to use a Gary phrase.
Yeah, I know, right? Crushing it. Look, some people who know you, obviously you're, I guess we say serial entrepreneur, somebody who's been very successful in life, still living it. The journey is super amazing. What are you afraid of? Like, what is some of the shit that you're afraid of?
I am always afraid of going back to a place of powerlessness, right? I don't ever want to be, that kid that can't fend for himself. So that's probably, number one. Two, that I got pulled away from the core job of being a dad, and that somehow it got away from me. And then
Very tough, very tough.
And then you wake up one day and you know, your kids, they're not interested in you, right? Like, so I think I'm winning that fight, but that would probably be my second biggest fear.
Yeah, I wouldn't say they're not interested. I would say they evolve. You know,
Yeah.
you know, and parenting never stays the same. You
Right.
know, it's like when you're young. You know, I have an 18-year-old daughter and a 3-year-old son, but you know, I was divorced when my daughter was 2 years old, and I'll be honest with you, I don't wish it on anybody. I actually had Fat Man Scoop on, and he was saying that he don't wish on his worst enemy. He doesn't wish divorce.
I agree. I say out of all the things I've ever been through, poverty, cancer, you know, name it, nothing compares to divorce, which is interesting because society doesn't look at it that way. Especially, I think, you know, to a degree with men. I realize how much men do struggle with the idea of loss of parenting responsibilities. And I'm sure there are a lot of heels out there too who don't do the right thing, but divorce is harder than anything. Cancer is way, in my life, way eclipsed by divorce. It might have been a head cold comparatively. You know, so I'm with you.
You were a lucky man, you know, as far as the cancer. But I will say, you know, as long as you're there and present in your kid's life, like I spoke about before, things will flourish. And there'll come times like, you know, my daughter, like I'm glad that I had another kid because at one point in time, you know, she didn't want me to. But at the same time, she was like starting to like say, yeah, Dad, I'm not going to see you this weekend. I'll see you next weekend. I'm busy.
Right.
And I was like, busy? Excuse me. And realize you have to have a life too. You know, that's a problem too with being divorced, you know, separated dad, so to speak. It's amazing and great, but it's also tough and hard. You know, you're not there all the time. You know, you have a limited time, and say if they're in trouble or something, you have to be a forceful, you know, dad when the times where you're not with them all the time.
I think that's actually I liken it to like a long distance relationship. There's a lot of pressure for that period of time when you're dating together to make sure it doesn't go off the rails, right? So you don't really want to discipline your kids if you're only with them for 40 hours, right?
It's like hey, you're a piece of shit, Dad. You know, yeah. Thank you for. But what are you gonna do? Let them do whatever they want. So it's like it's a struggle. But I will say, as long as you're there, I promise you. How old your kids?
No, I feel good about it. No, I have 4 kids.
Okay.
So they range from 10 to 11 to 15 to 17. So
okay,
I have
nice.
the whole, and they're amazing, and they all love each other. I have a great setup, so I feel like I'm getting it right as best as I possibly can.
As long as you give me your credit card for the Uber,
yeah, whatever.
You'll be okay.
No, I'm the worst, but I'm such an enabler. I admit it. I'm not. I'm definitely. I have the Disneyland dad thing to a bit, but that would be my second one, and then the third one would be just if I didn't have like fun along the way enough, like I bought in too much. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Like the reality is there's a degree of frivolity to everything that we're doing.
Sure.
The object of the exercise can't be about professional success nor money, because money is a means to an end, right? It's got to be about the full expression of the self.
Sure.
Right. So I don't ever want to stray too far from that. And then you wake up one day thinking, I was going to wait till I was 70 to visit the Great Wall, but now it turns out I got 6 months to live. Like that. But I keep that real close. Ever since post-cancer, I keep that real close to me. That's why whenever I take a work trip, I always create these little micro vacations every single time. I always go somewhere amazing. And I was in China and I only was there for 36 hours. I had the car divert so I could run up the Great Wall in my suit, ran all the way up, ran back. I was like, all right, I did the Great Wall. So if I never get
Is
back.
that bucket list?
Yeah, just more like I don't want to sequence. It's dangerous to sequence. I was sequencing up until the point that I had testicular cancer, right? So there were all these things that I deferred that I was going to do once I had enough money and I had enough autonomy. I was going to go back and revisit it, including like self-work. And then you realize, oh, I'm 33 and I might die. Oh, that was a fallacy. Sequencing is not an option. I better do everything concurrently. Joy, self-work. So that's my point. So,
What is your bucket list?
oh, what's my bucket list? I would really like to have enough money and influence.
But not to cut you off, but what is enough money?
Well, let me finish the point.
Okay,
I don't
yeah.
know what enough is. That if you have a significant amount of money, you can make a massive impact in people's lives. And if you could use your brain power that you were using along the way to create companies and solve problems, if you could use your brain power in other areas that are about ameliorating suffering, you could have a massive, massive impact on this universe. So I get excited by accumulating resources and then redistributing it. I get excited by the last chapter, and I don't know entirely what that looks like, because I do think at the moment the highest and best use of me is to try to build the net worth and build the assets. but I get excited by that last chapter. Is that a bucket list or is that more an aspiration? I think it's more just an aspiration about how I want my life to play out. That 16-year-old kid, right? I can do a lot of damage if properly resourced. You know?
Do you put money in other places besides your businesses and besides all the years of working with the Jets, you work with the Dolphins now, the company you formed with Steve Ross is called RSE Ventures, backing Gary V, doing all this? Do you invest in like real estate?
Yeah, I think everyone, it's fun to have tangible projects and properties, right? Like paper is very abstract, so you can have a ton of worth on paper. You talk to any founder or anybody who theoretically has made it because they just did an up round, and they'll tell you psychologically it means nothing to them. So there's something to be said for anything tangible that is in your possession, a restaurant, a piece of real estate. So I try to do projects where I can, and it's fun, but two, it feels a lot more tangible.
We can't as we wind this episode down, we can't forget about Steve Ross. How did you even meet this guy?
So Steve Ross, owner of the Dolphins. So I met him through
and
NFL,
1,000 other things.
And 1,000 other. I met him through NFL meetings, and he is just this magical figure who spends all his mental energy looking out on the horizon. I always look for this in people now. He doesn't tell stories. He doesn't spend his time recapping. He spends his time projecting outward and forward, right? So he's just a perpetual serial entrepreneur, and I had these ideas that I wanted to implement, and we just I fell in love. I don't know, hope it's mutual, but he and now we spend all day long just like looking for people like Michael Astoria, right? And looking to back greatness. And we align on that. Like if you look at our entire portfolio, which now includes David Chang, Momofuku, Gary Vaynerchuk, Jesse Darris, all these different brands. At every single one of them has a magical special founder who was kind of at an inflection point and needed something else to get the rest of the way there. Maybe Gary needed somebody to believe in him back at that bagel store, right? Sure. Or Michael Astoria, who's the nicest guy in the world.
Well, we had him on the show, co-founder of And Pizza.
Right. So Michael Astoria, co-founder of And Pizza, will be a transformational figure. He will be the next Howard Schultz of this generation, right? Because he's bringing his soul to a commoditized product, which is pizza, right? I like to think I'm his minister of defense, which he'll say, right? Like we're brothers and we're in the trenches together. So he needed somebody to run the War Department, which is what I do, along with my brother. Actually, my brother and we work with Michael very, very closely. So that's what's great with Steve. So we look for somebody magical. We have the freedom because we're using his capital, and we're not a firm. We don't care about exits. We can back these great people. And when I look backwards, it'll be a tremendous track record of backing great people at a critical moment in their lives.
Is there somebody who got away? Are you allowed to even talk about that?
Oh yeah, did somebody get away? No, we miss trends, I guess, but I can't think of anybody. And once they're in their web, there's no getting away. Let's just be honest. They're just not going to let them get away.
If you were an entrepreneur, honestly, what do you think you'd be doing?
Oh, if I wasn't an entrepreneur,
what the fuck would you be doing? I don't know.
I think I would have been a musician.
A musician?
Yeah, I think I would have been a piano player. I think I would have been in a band. I love music. I feel like being a piano player was in me, and I just never got around to it. And now I'm way too lazy. I have a big piano. It just sits there. But my son is an incredible piano player.
You think about your journey and how far you've come. And you still have a long way to go, and there's people out there, young entrepreneurs, young people who would love to be in where you're at, or even learn from you, or even understand, maybe they hit a bump in the road, and which I'm sure you've been through so many of them. What's some advice you would give them?
Well, I had a great, so Shark Tank was just, announced.
That's right.
Right. So I'm going to be on next season's Shark Tank.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. And my favorite comment that ran after was somebody posted on ABC's site. Goes, that's great, but I don't understand. He only has 400 followers on Instagram. And I wrote back to the guy. I said, 401? ? To me, that's amazing. So I'm on Shark Tank now, right? Yeah. And I dropped out of high school when I was 16.
Yeah.
So my point to entrepreneurs, do not allow yourself to be defined by what came before you, but by what comes next. And I know that sounds so obvious, but I do think that's what holds people back. The audacity of saying it, right? People have a hard time transitioning from an employee to a business owner because sometimes they're insecure by the idea of stating it, right? I own a business, right? That psychologically is very hard to make that transition.
Sure.
And Warren Buffett says it all. A smart plan will meet a genius without one any day of the week, right? So if you have a plan, you pretty much can get mostly where you want to get to. I love Shark Tank. I connect with my son about the show. It's probably the only thing, we watch on TV. And I made a very affirmative decision that I wanted to be part of it. And as crazy as that is, I'm on this season's Shark Tank, right? So I tell anybody, like, just don't have a plan and don't define yourself by where you are right now.
I like that. Do you believe that luck plays a big role in success? Do you believe that?
I'm not a huge believer in luck. I am a huge believer in lemonade out of lemons, that every negative situation gives you an opportunity to leverage it, right? Like, never waste a good crisis is something that Rahm Emanuel would always say. I totally believe in that. So, for example, it seems unlucky that I grew up in the circumstances that I did, getting a GED, everything I went through with my mother, right? But now that I put in the hard work to get to where I am, I can deliver a message that people will listen to, and I can inspire millions of people with that. So is that unlucky, or is that at the end a gift once I put the work in, right? So I'm a huge believer that there is really no bad things. There's a saying in Buddhism, like, who's to say what is bad or good? I believe in that more than I believe in luck necessarily. There almost are no bad things in life.
When it's all said and done, Matt Higgins, what do you want your legacy to be?
First and foremost, that he was a great dad. That's number one. And that I lived up to what I'm telling you right now, which is that I devoted a lot of my life and resources to ameliorating suffering, that it wasn't just talk. So that when I'm really in a position to do it, I do it. I want that to be my legacy.
Speaking of being a dad, with access to so many things, how do you teach your kids to have financial stability? How do you teach them? I wonder how that is. Meaning, I give an example for me, and my daughter, she has a lot of friends that are their families are wealthy. And so she'll tell me, Dad, you got to buy me a Benz. And I'm like, listen, that's not happening. Maybe I get you a Toyota Camry, a Honda Accord, something like that. I'm not getting you a Benz, especially not your first car. And I don't try to keep up with the Joneses. I'm very real with her. One day financially, if I do get there, maybe I get her a Benz. But she's going to know what it is. And not that there's nothing wrong with it. You work hard, and your kids are going to benefit from that. But do you find that hard to teach them financial stability, or any type of when you could literally I see people like Michael Grubin, the
Fanatics?
The Fanatics,
Yeah.
co-owner of the Sixers and the
he's
Devils.
awesome. I love Michael. You've had him on your show?
No, I had. I want to have him on.
He's amazing.
I want to have him on because I love what he's done with Meek Mill and how he wants to care about prison reform.
Ruben is incredible.
But more importantly, I see him travel with his kid, and he looks like a separated dad also. It's funny how you see these separated things, and which I was, so it hits home to heart, which I am. And, I see he puts her on a private plane and they play this game she doesn't know where she's going. You know what I mean? He's like, guess where we're going? And she doesn't know. And then next thing you know, they're in fucking Italy or what's that place with the little huts in the water?
I don't know.
Maybe Ibiza.
It's good to be Michael Rubin's kid, though.
Yeah.
There's no question.
I'm sure it's good to be Matt Higgins' kid, too.
Yeah, well, I used to worry about this, that you don't want to be alienated from your own kids. A couple of important principles, I think. You cannot manufacture struggle. Either you're in a struggle or not. So the idea that you're going to artificially deny your kids your current and create this Potemkin village of sadness and poverty is not going to happen, right? It is what it is.
True,
government cheese is not available on Seamless, right? Yeah. So I that train has left the station. I said, but I do think when you look at people who behave, who are obnoxious in society and whatnot, usually it's because they're defining their self-worth through material possessions, right? They're defining their self-worth relative to others. I have the nicer car, I have the nicer clothes, right? That begins with the parents. I do not define my self-worth by quality of clothes, quality of car.
Sure.
I have to rely on people like Michael Astoria to have any sense of style or whatnot. So number one, do not define yourself by that, and your kids won't either. To me, I found that to be the most important attribute. And then otherwise, just make sure that they have respect for money and what it takes. Like, my kids are very aware of how hard I work.
Sure.
And what that means to everybody. And so I've actually found it to be a lot easier. As long as you don't walk around and think that you're anything because you have some money and some possessions, it's fine.
Sure.
I feel like I was blessed with kids with incredible values. So I haven't found it to be a struggle. But I don't deny them either, just to make everybody feel bad.
Sure. Do they ask for crazy? Do you ever look back to when you were growing up? Like, did they ask for like crazier things? And I mean, obviously, there's more access now to get. But I mean, you weren't getting those things when you were young.
Well,
sometimes I don't look at purchases like that. I look at what my kids like my mother will say to me, Pete, at 15, you didn't go to school a lot. You were troublesome. She's not as she's good. We would always measure her by how I was, and
I struggle too because I don't want to feel like denying myself anything, right? Yeah. So you have to sequence it out with your own kids, right? Like this notion that everyone needs to wait for things, but I try to follow typical parent rules, in that area. But yeah, they're just well grounded. Like, they're not looking for crazy stuff. The fact that everybody has all this technology when my mother never went on an airplane, I find kind of fascinating, and some of these trips we end up taking. But mostly, I think it's all good. I always talk to my brother about this. Because we went to Queens College, which I love and is grateful for that institution. But if my kids can go to Harvard, Yale, whatever, I'm going to let them do that too.
Sure,
because there's no reason to start, behind the eight ball, right? Not that going there, it's a great school, but you just don't have to artificially construct struggle. Life will bring struggle soon enough. I don't believe that anybody is born on third base, and I don't believe in judging anybody because they came from wealth or they went to an Ivy League school. I think that's nonsense because everybody's harboring some struggle, and it's not where you started, it's the distance you cover in the end. So I feel very passionate about that, right? It's very easy for somebody where I came from to almost make somebody feel bad because they're not self-made. I think that's total bullshit, right?
Sure.
Like that everybody's got to make themselves, even if you were born with $1 billion, because you've defined your mission, right? So I try not to judge too much.
I have two last questions for you, and one is you had you mentioned a bunch of times I've seen that you had a nice long talk one time with Warren Buffett. What did you learn from that conversation?
Oh, that's so interesting. Well, number one, he has always been a hero to me because I feel like I didn't grow up with that strong dad relationship. So I do seek out some model for my values, right?
Sure.
And there are a couple of people that I do think, have it, and Warren Buffett, right, has it. I've read his papers and I've read books about him and I've watched the HBO documentary, right? So number one, I was really hoping that he would live up to that because it would be like finding out there's no Santa Claus when you're 6 years old, like I hope he is what he says he is. And after spending a couple hours, he was that thing. And the fact that here's this guy's third richest person in the world and completely down to earth was amazing to me. That there's this conventional wisdom that you're going to reach a certain rarefied air and you're going to have to be alienated from everybody else. And yet he has managed to stay on the ground. And so what it told me is that if you don't manage to keep your feet on the ground, it's entirely your fault. You have no excuse because Warren Buffett has been able to live in the same house and relate. And the other part, which I thought was incredible, he brought to the Dolphins game his entire family office. And if you met everybody, you would have no idea that they spend all day long around a guy that people will spend $1 million on an auction to have, breakfast with, right?
Sure.
And he treated everyone like a family, very tender, very normal. So I guess the biggest thing I learned from him that day was you have no excuse not to remain a human throughout the journey, right? Because here's the third richest person on earth, and he's incredible. And then he gave me some advice that we talked about, I've been thinking about and for another day, but that I've been sitting with. But to have Warren Buffett for a couple hours.
For sure, come on.
Incredible.
I mean, look, it's just a testament to your journey, man. I mean,
Yeah, there's a Forrest Gump quality to it all. My brother always makes fun of me. Like, where's Matt today?
Yeah.
Who are you with now? Oh, Bill Clinton?
Tell him it's mysterious. He'll never know. Lastly, how do you manage your time, man? I know, you're moving all around. You're traveling different parts of the country. How do you manage your time?
Yeah, and it's hard. And at times when I haven't managed it well are the times when I've been the least successful. So it starts with what's most important to you, right? What are your bedrock principles that you're going to try not to compromise? I've been better about health like saying, I'm not going to compromise that. I'm not going to let the job, take me away from that and working out and whatnot. And then it's about impact. If people are afraid, like, how you dive into your inbox and you just start randomly answering it, even though it's not really correlated to what's the most important, you just begin to answer them, right? Ask yourself, what is the highest and best use of my time today? And how am I going to have the greatest impact? I do that pretty religiously. And that changes almost from hour to hour. Like, new set of facts. It's more important that I do that. And I'm willing to kind of pivot throughout the day. But I'll start my day early on. What's the highest and best use of my time today? What's the most important thing? I'll make notes to try to plan my work so I can work my plan and then go throughout it while maintaining flexibility. I never get too rigid because it's just too chaotic, my life. But somehow it all holds together.
Hey, listen, you're doing an amazing job, and the journey is really just beginning. And now on Instagram, you're Matt Higgins.
RSE.
RSE. Do you mess with Twitter?
Huh? Lately I just struggle with Twitter. I feel like
just
a lot
throw
of
something out there.
Well, I just feel like a lot of the suffering in our society is related to Twitter. It's a kind of a hateful place. I like, Instagram. I feel like there's a lot of positivity and joy out there on Instagram and people seeking positive messages. Twitter has unleashed something. Maybe it's Trump has just turned me on it.
Could be. But you know what's worse? YouTube comments. Be careful when you look at YouTube comments.
I don't look at those either. I just only traffic in Instagram lately. Like,
Some
why do I have
just-
to be on? Heather, over here will tell me that I have to be on Twitter, but I just think it cultivates so much anger and hate. I don't know.
I mean, if it's a piece of the outlet, you know what I mean.
Well, right. You can't like stop participating in society.
I believe in it. I believe in Twitter a lot.
You believe in Twitter more than Instagram?
No, but I would say I like Instagram just a small bit better.
You know what I like about Instagram? Twitter, if you're calculated and clever and you have access to breaking news, you can grow your audience pretty easily, like with tactics.
Sure.
Instagram, you got to kind of earn it.
Sure,
right?
sure.
There's no viral. I love that they easily could have built into a viral component to Instagram by making it easier to repost, right? Like, there are a lot of tactics that they adopted to make it a positive platform that it's hard to game. And I like the fact you got to earn it. I like the fact that as somebody at my level, you interact with people and you comment and engage them, and that's how you build your audience. I kind of like the authenticity. Whereas Twitter, it's easy to kind of come up with something that gets reposted and it goes viral. And I don't know, not to hate on Twitter. I own some Twitter stock, for the record. But what about Snapchat?
I like Snapchat, but it's kind of like more like I feel like Instagram stories hurt them. I feel like they put a little dent in them.
They did. Is there another platform on the horizon?
I mean, Facebook I feel is still good. I love Twitter. I love Instagram. I don't know, man.
Twitch? Do you play around on Twitch?
Not really. Not really.
Gary
loves that. I was up there playing. He plays. Please, he loves all that. You know. I think YouTube is still humongous. Obviously, I think there'll be a lot more platforms where you could be yourself, where you could be your own press, you could be your own voice, you could answer something real time. I mean,
I was having this debate with somebody. They're launching a TV show, and I won't say who they are, but they were, very passionate about the idea that, I don't want to engage in social. It's kind of being a purist. I just want to engage in a TV show. And I'm thinking, so let me ask you, you're going to launch your TV show and you're going to pitch a bunch of reporters to maybe cover your show so that in the hopes that you could actually reach people who are reading that reporter's article. So now you're injecting a layer between yourself and whoever's reading it. Why wouldn't you just use the tools that are out there to aggregate your own audience and communicate? And that's what's amazing. That's what Gary Vee predicted when we were sitting in that coffee shop, the democratization of the creation of content, that everybody's going to be their own producer. And now everybody is. I regret I took a break for like 5 years, just kept my head down, rebuilding.
You'll be back. You'll be back. The thing is, just because if someone's not on social, or just because something didn't and don't fall into this category. If it didn't, if it didn't happen, if you didn't put it on social, it didn't happen. There's a lot of people moving and grooving that may have not posted it.
It's true.
I believe in making more moves and less announcements.
Well, I think you go through periods of life too where you don't want to invite that engagement, right? You just keep your head down. You feel like being a bit anonymous. So I did for a period of time, but then you have to build it back up again. So I wasn't on Instagram, but now I'm enjoying it. It's fun.
Listen, the one and only Matt Higgins. Let me tell you something, okay? First, I'm gonna leave you off on this, okay? Sometimes you're busy living your life. You don't even realize how much of an inspiration you are. I don't care how much money you make. Your most worth is going to be your inspiration.
Oh, thank you.
I mean, you're a guy who, like I said, mattress on the floor, government cheese, your mother in a wheelchair. Your success, your best success day was when your mother passed away, which was the worst day. Rest in peace. I mean, to go flying in private jets with Steve Ross, to have a guy like Steve Ross believe in you, walk with Warren Buffett, believe in Gary Vaynerchuk, believe in and pizza. I mean, survive from fucking cancer. Try to be the best. It's fucking sick. Honestly, think about this. The journey. No, I mean that. And I wish you the best of success.
Oh, thank you. This has been great. Yeah. I appreciate it. And you too.
Yeah, thank you, bro. The one and only Matt Higgins. Take care. Internets, if you enjoyed that episode, I want you to email me at thepremiumpeteshow@gmail.com. Again, that email is thepremiumpeteshow@gmail.com. Let me know what you thought. And listen, all my advertisers out there, all my big businesses, my small businesses, whoever, a friend, a store, you want to advertise on The Premium Pete Show? Email me at thepremiumpeteshow@gmail.com and let's get working. Okay? Make sure you subscribe, rate, leave a comment on all streaming platforms of the podcast. Tell a friend to tell a friend, and we'll see you next episode. Cheers.